So let's create a ground plane. Ooh. Ah. Look at that. I'm so fancy. Ground plane. See, this is what happens when I'm tired. Now, this is just going to be a ground plane for things to sit on. Now, let's... How do we want to do this? Let's create a cone. We're going to have this cone. This is going to be our base. And I'm just going to snap it up here to the top of the plane so it just sits there. And let's say we have this cone, but then let's imagine it's actually like a giant mountain or something like that. And now we need our character. Maybe they're either climbing the mountain or maybe they're driving a little dune buggy thing up the mountain. So let's just create a polygon. Let's do a cube. Just for the heck of it. We've got this cube here. And I need to have the cube on the mountain here. And I'm going to drive around the mountain up to the top. Just going to go round, round, round up to the top. Now, I'm doing this situation to explain a hand grabbing a prop. It's going to be the same thing. But it's essentially we need two objects to interact with an advanced setup. Now, I could try to do this manually. And for anyone who's tried to do something like this, you know the nightmare it's going to be. So let's say frame 1. We're just going to go frame 1 to frame 51. 50 frames. So frame 1, we need to be here. Frame 50, we need to be at the top right there. Okay. So we've got that. Okay, that wasn't so bad. Now I need this to go around. So, okay, frame 15, it'll be over here, but I have to rotate this here. Okay. And then I have to go over here and so on and so forth. You can already see the tediousness of this. And then as you scrub through, oh, well, that's cutting through. So let's add another key here. It's going to take a while. And then what happens if our director says, no, this frame here needs to be much lower. It needs to be down here on the mountain. Okay, now I've got to redo a whole bunch of stuff. And we've only gone like a quarter of the way. What if we need to do 3 spins around this? It's already... It's not impossible, but it's a headache that we don't need to deal with. So, how do we do this? Well, first, just for the sake of cleanliness, I'm going to take all my objects here and I'm just going to freeze their transformations. What that does is just make sure that all of their transforms, their rotate scales, all of that are reset. So modify, freeze transforms, and we're not dealing with any weird values. That's just a good thing to do whenever you're doing any modeling like this or like using props. So, how do we get this to be a more useful setup for ourselves? Something that we can animate quickly and make changes efficiently. Well, essentially what we need is a way to control different elements at different times. Now, just to make this even harder for ourselves, I'm going to say that this mountain is actually a giant and is moving as well. Just to add extra difficulty. So it's moving and it's not going to be a straight line. No, we're not going to give ourselves that easy of a job here. It's moving around like that. So we've got, not only does this cube have to follow this, but it has to do it while it's moving. Extra difficulty. How do we do this? Well, let's go over our options. First option is that we just parent it. So we just take the cube here and parent it to the cone. So for regular parenting, which is under Edit, Parent, this is putting one object under the hierarchy of another. All we need to do is select the child first, then the parent. When it comes to parenting, a good parent always puts the child first. That's how you can remember the order. So child, then parent. Go to edit, parent, or hit the P key. And there you go. Our cube is under the cone. Now, whoop, there we go. It moves along. Great. The problem is that we still have to animate it manually. We still have to do the same rotation method that we did before. And the problem with this is, what if I want the cube to not be attached to it first? Maybe it has to run up to the giant, jump on, and then climb the hat. How do we do that? With parenting, you can't turn it on or off. It's always on. So suddenly we've lost the ability to control certain elements of our scene. Parenting is very good in many situations, but when it comes to animation, more often than not, you kind of run into limitations with it. Let's see, do you have different terms for the regular parent and the constraint parent when communicating them to others? Yeah, so with parenting, it's a child and parent relationship. With constraining, it's a leader and follower. So with a parent situation, you put the child first. A good parent puts the child first. In a constraint situation, a good leader goes first. They don't push their followers in first. They lead the way. So you select the leader first, then the follower. It's the opposite. So that's the way I remembered now. The original way I learned it, which I'm not a huge fan of anymore, was that constraints are a master-slave situation, where the constrained object, it is constrained, it is shackled, it is locked to this object. And a master who owns a slave, is he going to put the slave first? No, he's obviously a terrible person, so he's going to put himself first. That's the way I was taught it for a long time. That's the way I was explaining it. I'm not a huge fan of that anymore for obvious reasons. So I prefer the leader follower, simply because a constrained object, when you do it right, it is not shackled. It just gives new options. It has new ways of doing things. And I prefer thinking of it like that because it avoids that thought process of, okay, I've constrained it. I can't do anything with it. It's locked. It's like locked down. I can't do nothing. No, you can do a lot of things as long as you know how to do it. And to me, like, if you have a good leader, it allows the followers to be even better. It allows them to expand their horizons more than they could normally. So that's the way I remember it. Let's see. So with this, let's say we have this situation here. We want this to be able to run up and jump on, so we can't use a parent situation. We can't have that, what would be the right word? We can't have it just parented because we need to turn this on and off. We need that ability. So we need to make a constraint. Now, when making constraints, the big number one thing you want to make sure you do is never constrain one thing directly to another. So I want the cube here to follow the cone. I'm not going to constrain the cube directly to the cone. So again, take the leader, then the follower, like this. I'm going to go into my animation menu set, constrain parent. Now, for anyone who hasn't seen my demos on constraints before, why is parent over here? Didn't we just do a parent over here? It's kind of confusing at first. The reason that we have a constrained parent, or a parent constraint, is it is a constraint that mimics parenting. It mimics how two objects will lock together. It is not an actual parent operation. It is not parenting an object. It is a constraint. So we just have to be very clear on that. A parent constraint is not parenting. So I selected the leader, then the follower, less parent, like that. Now it follows along. Great. And with a constraint, you have the ability to turn it on and off, which is great. I can just do that here. Or if I set a key, I would have a blend parent. Yay. The problem with this is a constraint is a lock in a sense. It is constraining two objects together, keeping them together. Which means that if I just do this straight constraint, I cannot animate this cube. If I move it up here, whoop, it snaps right back to where it was. So as an animator, this sucks because I just lost the ability to move things. That's not good. So we very rarely want to do a straight constraint. How do we get more control? Well, the simple way that I usually show on stream, and this is the way I animate most shots, honestly, when I don't need a complex constraint system, I just need something to hold another, and that's about it, is I like to use locators, but you can use a group, you can use a null object, you can use anything. Essentially, you want to have a buffer between the object that will follow and the object that leads. The reason I like to use locators is because they're visible in the viewport and I can select them, which makes them easier to manipulate than always having to look through the outliner. Groups and stuff, you don't see a visual representation, so you always have to select them in the outliner, which kind of gets a little tedious to me and just my workflow. So I'm going to go to create. I'm going to create a locator here. Let's just move it out. The exact position honestly doesn't matter. And we want the cube to follow the cone. So the way we're going to do this is we are going to constrain the cube to the locator. And then to make this a little bit, we'll just keep everything separate right now just so we can see. So we're going to constrain the cube to the locator. And let's do this right here. So cube, locator. We select the locator first, the leader, then the follower, constrain, parent. Now, that means that if I move the locator, you can see the cube moves with it. Yay. Now, we just need this whole setup here to move with the cone. So I'm just going to take the locator and parent it to the cone. Just regular parenting. So we take the child, then the parent. And I'm just going to hit P on the keyboard to do that. You can see it's being put into the hierarchy of the cone there. And now everything moves together. Now, why does that work? What does that give us? Well, essentially, the cone is moving. The locator is a child of that cone, so it's going to move with it. And because the box is constrained to the locator, it follows along. It's being dragged along. Now, that gives us the ability to still animate the locator because it's a child. It is not constrained. So I can move this wherever I want, and it still works. The cube, because it is constrained, can still be turned on or off. I can turn off that constraint, and it no longer follows. I've got the best of both worlds with none of the negatives. There you go. It's a very simple constraint setup that gives you pretty much everything you need for a lot of different situations. So, very simple, but very effective. If ever you're doing a constraint, whether it's a character holding a prop or like the hand that has to be moved on its own, you just want to do a simple setup like this. Most of the time, it really isn't too hard. But the problem with this is it doesn't solve a lot of the issues that we put forth at the beginning. What happens if we want this box to spin around the cone while it's doing something else, and we want to have a lot of control over this? We want to be able to really manipulate this object in a lot of specific ways. Well, at that point, what we need to do is just create extra locators, extra controls that allow us to manipulate things in very specific ways. So let's see if I can explain this and show this in a way that makes sense. It's one of those things that when you look at it at first, it's like, what the heck are they doing? Once you understand the base of it, it makes sense. But let's see if I can do it correctly here. So with one locator, we can get all of this extra control. But the main issue is that essentially we're just animating this the same way that we would animate one object. Instead of moving the cube, I'm moving the locator. I haven't gotten any extra control here. But what I can do is I can make a hierarchy of locators, which will give me additional controls. So let's kind of show this here. I'm just going to put this locator right at the point, just for the heck of it. It looks so pretty. So it's right at the point here. And let's create another locator. So I'm just going to duplicate that. We've got a locator 2. And with this, let's put this down here. Now, if I take locator 1 and I make that a parent, so I'm going to put locator 2 underneath locator 1 like this. So I just middle mouse drag here. It's the same thing as selecting both and hitting P. You can just middle mouse drag objects within each other in the outliner to parent them. That's my favorite way of doing it. It's very quick. So I just did that. What does that give us? Well, now locator 1, if I move this around, it now moves locator 2. I can still move locator 2 on its own, like so. Now, if I wanted this locator here to spin around the object, all I need to do is do this. Whoop, and it spins around. I've got an extra level of control. It allows me to offset different things. So let's do a quick, simple demo here. Let's take locator 2 and it's going to control the box, just like we had before. So the box is going to be constrained by locator 2. So locator 2 is the follower. Sorry, locator 2 is the leader. The box is the follower. Constrain, parent. Okay, very similar setup. Now, what I can do with this is just key. Let's mute the cone here so it doesn't move for now. Muting an object just turns off the animation there. So now I can have locator 2 here, moving the box upwards like this, and maybe inwards. And I use the first locator to just spin it around. Like that. So let's just animate this super quick. I want 3 rotations, let's say. So from frame 1 to frame 51, we're going to go 960 degrees. I think that's correct. No, 360. We'll go a little bit more. My math is not great today. 1080. That's what I want. There we go. So now, oops, wrong hotkey. We get the cube just spinning around. I want an extra. We'll go 4 spins. There you go. I wanted 4 spins to begin with. We've just got that. And that's because the top locator is just spinning around. Now I can take this locator and all I need to do is animate it going straight up right here and then in like so. Now let's actually make sure I set a key at the beginning and the end. That'll help. Okay. So let me do that again. Just make sure I set my keys correctly. Zero that back out there. Like so. Now we get this. It goes up easily all the way up. We've got the top one that's making the object go round, and the other one is just going up and in. We've added an extra set of controls. It allows us to manipulate things in more efficient ways. And depending on the complexity of this, we can go all out. It really gives you a lot of finesse on this. And what's great is, let's say our director comes in and goes, you know, on frame 23 here, it only needs to be halfway up. It hasn't made it all the way yet. Well, instead of having to reanimate everything, all I have to do is bring this down here, add one more key. Now it takes more time to get there, and it goes up a little faster. But the rotation is still perfect in place. What if the rotation needs to slow down? Maybe like frame 33, he needs to like really chug along here. So maybe from frame 32 to frame 36, I need the character just barely move here. So like it slows down. Let's almost stop it here. Whoop. Let's go even further and actually make sure I key this properly again. There we go. So now it goes up, stops, and then keeps rotating again. Very quick and easy. I don't have to reanimate and reposition and re-rotate everything. I'm just doing quick, simple edits, and I'm done. And exactly, the best part is that it's going to be a lot easier to clean the graph editor. Instead of having all of these curves that are all interact in weird ways, I now just have a very simple curve. And I can just adjust that, make sure I get a nice ease in right there. Maybe I want it to go start fast up the start here, right there. So now, whew, it just spins, 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 ooh, comes to a stop and speeds up. Done. There we go. Now, what happens if we want to add a little bit more control? Maybe as this is climbing, we want it to start flat, but as it goes up, maybe it kind of starts to lean down. How do we do that? Well, we just need an extra level of control. For every extra level of control, you just add another locator or another level in the hierarchy. So right now we've got 2 locators. Well, let's add one more here. So to do this, I'm just going to go to create locator. And let's go back to the beginning here. Usually you don't want to try to do this when you've got a bunch of stuff animated. We'll see if I can get it to work here without breaking anything. We'll see. And I want it to pivot from this edge right there. So essentially what I want is as it goes up, I want it to be able to pivot from the edge that's against the cylinder, or sorry, the cone right here. I'm going to take this locator and I'm going to place it between the other 2. So now we have locator 1, then locator 3, because it's going to be controlling locator 2, which controls the cube. Essentially, I want to just add one more level in there. If I put it under locator 2, it's not going to do anything because locator 2 is the thing that's moving the cube. So I put that there. Now, hopefully my animation, yeah, see how it broke? This is why you want to be careful about how you animate things. Essentially what's happening is all of the animation that I did is now being kind of affected by this locator right here. Because I've reparented things, it's throwing the whole thing off like that. So you want to make sure your settings are correct right away. Otherwise, this happens, unfortunately. Now, honestly, it's not a hard thing to fix, especially if you catch it early. So right here, we've got the spin of this object. Essentially, the up and down isn't working anymore. All I need to do is go to my keys. I wanted this object to be up at the top. So let's see. How do I want to do this correctly? Essentially, what I need to do is have this object be my up and down as well. I'm going to take out the up and down here. Just delete that. And then let's see. We'll just delete all the animation and redo it here. So we now have this object there and we still have our spin. So our spin is still perfect. He's exactly how we want it to be. Now I can take this locator and we're going to have it do pretty much the same thing. Let's just have it come up to the top there. So it spins up, goes round, 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 round. But now, because I put this extra locator right on the edge there, I can just use this and add a little whoop down there. So now by the time it reaches the top, you can see it's just kind of going lower, 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 lower. There we go. So we can adjust that in unique ways. And once again, every new layer you can add more finesse and more control. So that's really the basics. And it's one of those things that it will be tricky to grab at first, to understand and to really like piece together. But once you get it, it makes a huge difference in your ability to work and your ability to simplify what could be a really complex animation. So if we take this now, our cone was moving. So if I take our first locator here, I'm just going to parent it to the cube, or sorry, not to the cube, to the cone. Now it's going to follow the cone. If I unmute the cone, we get all of our animation on a moving object. Right there. Now, is it the coolest animation? Not really. It's kind of weird looking. But you can see how that would have been a kind of a nightmare to deal with. But with just a few locators and creating a little bit of a hierarchy, we get a much more interesting animation. And it didn't take us very long. Like, aside from the explanation, this would have taken maybe 5 minutes at most to animate and then polish. It's done. So the ability to create a hierarchy of constraints is huge, or a hierarchy of locators and parenting and constraining, I should say. So all of that is the theory behind it. How can we put this to practical use? How can we make this a little bit more easy to see and actually see how it would be like useful to us day to day?